Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Analysing Anfield. I'm Josh Williams, and I'm joined by David Hughes. How are you getting on, mate?
Very good, thanks, Josh. How are you, more importantly?
I'm good, as always, but I feel like this little intro is getting a little bit stale, isn't it? I mean, you need to start introducing a few and start asking me how I am or something like this. We need to mix it up a little bit.
Maybe I should stop getting my haircut again. You know, that kind of gave us something
Yeah.
different for a couple of months, didn't it?
Yeah, or maybe for a few episodes, you should just start coming on just miserable, absolutely devastated every week or something like that. That'll mix it up.
Well, if Liverpool keep winning the title, I'm sure I will be, mate.
This week's episode, then. Obviously, it's a little bit dry on the footballing front. Liverpool haven't signed any players since Tsimikas. We went into great detail on him last week. None of Liverpool's rivals have signed any players really either. We thought Sancho was going to go through. That seems to have hit some stumbling blocks. I can't think of any other player. I mean, Willian, but we spoke a little bit about Willian.
Yeah.
So this week,
should we say the Havertz one for Chelsea?
Yeah, the Havertz one that seems to have gone a little bit quiet. So in terms of transfers, it does seem a little bit quiet. Yeah, I mean, we can start talking about who Aston Villa are signing and players like that, but I'm not really sure that there's much of an interest from the Liverpool fan base in that sort of stuff. So what we're going to do is, I'm not sure if this is the first ever episode that is going to be fan-led in terms of an idea sent in by a listener that we're going to actually just tackle for the whole episode, really. So this is from, I hope I pronounced his surname right. This is from Chris Coughlin. I assume he's Irish, but I'm not sure. He suggested that on the back of the Tsimikas episode, we obviously went into great detail on Tsimikas, why Liverpool have signed him, why it makes sense. But this podcast is only about just under 2 years old, I think. So when Liverpool bought Salah, Fabinho, Alisson, Firmino, Mane, whatever, this podcast wasn't going. So we couldn't provide that insight. So this lad sent me a message and just asked whether we could go along the same lines with Tsimikas podcast, but with, why Liverpool bought Firmino, why Liverpool bought Mane, Salah, Robertson, Van Dijk, Fabinho, and Alisson are the players that we're going to do today. If we get through them all, I mean, I'm not sure how long it's going to take. But it's a shame that the podcast weren't going back then, Dave, is it? Because, they would have been big signs for us to cover. Since we've only been able to cover Minamino and Tsimikas, two players who are probably going to be backups, really.
Yeah, it kind of felt that like those couple of seasons was a little bit of, I don't know if I'm overstating this, but it felt like a little bit of a golden period in terms of transfer business for this modern Liverpool side, in terms of what they've become. And yeah, it would have been really good, especially for us to drill down on them. But I suppose retrospectively we're doing the same now, and hopefully we'll be able to shed some light on maybe why Liverpool was so keen to bring these players in.
Yeah, so we're going to go in the order from which the players signed, really. So we're going to start with Roberto Firmino. And if you do look at Liverpool during this period, I'm less confident in saying that this was an intentional genius buy. I mean, it might have been, but this was a bad period for the club. The recruitment was all over the place. I had a look at who we bought in that window, which I will get to. But yeah, I'm a little bit mixed when it comes to what Liverpool had in mind when they really bought Firmino, because I assumed he bought him as a 10, but I really have no clue. To be honest, it's a tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's so funny you say that, because I can hear my echo there, so apologies to anyone if there's any sound issues, but we covered that, didn't we, last week, Josh, that we're just missing the studio so much.
Yeah, just for the record, it's fine on my side. I can't hear much of an echo, so.
Well, hopefully you guys can't hear it. But yeah, it's so funny you say that, Josh, because one of the first thing I've put in, we do kind of brief notes before the show, and one of the first things I said in mine was I'm not really sure how part of the grand scheme of things this transfer was, because if I'm right in saying it was pre-Klopp, wasn't it? I think it was the back end of Rodgers. It wasn't really the Liverpool that you see now. I don't even think the 4-3-3 was that prevalent at the time, was it? I think it was more a 4-2-3-1 formation. Firmino wasn't really a centre forward. I know he's quite unique as he is now, but that final season, I had a quick gander and he played there twice. He played as an attacking midfielder 19 times and as a second striker 13 times. So I don't know. I mean, obviously there's a player there operating between the lines, doesn't he? And that will kind of fit what he's turned out to be for Liverpool. He had decent output as well. In terms of only basic stuff that we could look back on during that period, goals and assists, it was 7 goals, 10 assists for the 8th placed Hoffenheim side. So, he looked like a good player, but I'm inclined to agree with you that I'm not sure. I'm not sure you would have anticipated how successful he would have been, not only as a player but also in this system.
Yeah, I mean, there's positives attached to the deal. He was signed aged 23. When he was signed, I was actually aware of him. I can't remember why. I think this was back in the days when I was a big Football Manager fan or something like that. But I was aware of him as a talent, and I liked the thought of Liverpool signing him and stuff like that. This wasn't like a Tsimikas buy where I was like, "Who's this lad?" Obviously, it was 5 years ago, so the whole concept of analytics was a lot smaller. Michael Edwards wasn't yet leading Liverpool's recruitment. He got appointed as the sporting director, I think, about a year and a half later. This was when Rodgers was still, kind of digging his feet into the ground, making a bit of a statement as if to say the recruitment has to be manager-led. Bit of a dinosaur perspective, to be honest. And in the same summer that Liverpool paid 29 million for Firmino, we went and signed Christian Benteke for in and around 35 million. So when you look at that, it's hard to summarise what the intention was there at the time. We obviously had Lallana. We signed Danny Ings in the same summer. I think Nathaniel Klein was around that period. But in terms of looking at the grand scheme of things, and particularly the lack of pace at Liverpool at the time, going and signing Benteke, Ings, who's obviously good but not the quickest, Firmino, we had Lallana, we had Coutinho. Yeah, where's the speed? Where's the Liverpool we know today? It's a difficult one to summarise in terms of why Liverpool did it and what the intention was, and whether it was genius or whether it was just kind of a lucky break. As you said, he had 7 goals and 10 assists in the Bundesliga. I'm not sure if you looked into it, his numbers a little bit deeper, but he was quite creative. His expected assist numbers were decent. I think since he's came to Liverpool, people say he's kind of like the creator, and Salah and Mane are the scorers sort of thing. But if you look at Firmino's assist numbers, they're not really that high. He doesn't really post very, very high assist numbers. He was more of a creator, judging by his assist numbers at least, for Hoffenheim than he was for Liverpool.
Yeah, it's really difficult. I was wondering whether you were going to be looking at maybe a Benteke or Ings leading the line, and maybe a front two with him playing in behind, and the more kind of technical play, and then you your traditional kind of striker, I guess. But I'm like you, I'm trying to put the pieces together. I can't really see it. I'm not really sure what direction that team was going to go. Which again goes back to the point we made at the start, where I'm just unsure about whether this one was just a little bit of fortune in terms of how it's turned out and how integral he's become to the team.
Yeah, I mean, it did seem a lot like a Rodgers period, to be honest, because a year earlier Liverpool signed Lallana, who has been a great servant to the club. Klopp's obviously a massive fan for what he does for the squad behind the scenes and all that sort of stuff, but in terms of his output, he's never been much of an output merchant. He's always been more of a technical, nice, aesthetically pleasing type player, which Rodgers seems to like. Obviously, we signed Benteke, who was going to kind of be that big physical player who also had a bit of an all-round game, also had a bit of speed, goals and stuff like that. I remember Guillaume Balaguer said a few years ago that a Premier League manager had asked him for a player in that mould. I think he suggested Rondon at the time to the manager who asked him, but I can't remember why, but I'm pretty sure it was Rodgers at the time. I think Rodgers went through a period at Liverpool where he wanted that kind of all-round striker for quite a while. I said something along the lines of taking Liverpool on a new technical direction when we signed Benteke. So
it's very Rodgers.
It is very Brodge. But I think he lost his way. I think he lost his way in that period. And I think Benteke was a Rodgers signing. And I think Firmino was what is deemed as a committee signing. Something that the committee had picked up on. Rodgers weren't familiar with him particularly. When he came in, he was used on the right of midfield, I think, on the left as a 10. All this mad stuff. Klopp completely changed it when he came in, and obviously started to deploy him as a number 9. And I think moving forward, the other players that we're going to address, it feels like more of a plan develops, mainly possibly because of Klopp's interpretation of the squad and a clear plan moving forward and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I think we're probably in the same boat here in Firmino when it comes to being uncertain as to whether it was a masterstroke or whether it was a shot in the dark that ended up hitting the target. I mean, he did come across in Germany as quite an unorthodox player. You know, he did have pressing to his game, tricks. I always wonder, you know, when it comes to this long-term plan and a club want to get a manager in, say for example City. Pep was a massive fan of De Bruyne in Germany, and it just so happens that so many months before Pep joins, you know, City going to spend 55 million on De Bruyne. Pep was also supposed to be a Sterling fan at Bayern. Bayern were linked with a move for him. City going to spend 50 odd million on Raheem Sterling. Maybe I doubt it, but maybe Liverpool targeted Firmino as a Klopp type player, or you know, something like that. I'm not sure, but looking at Liverpool's recruitment back then, it's kind of hard to determine who was actually running the ship. Edwards wasn't appointed as the big man yet. Rodgers was, you know, making statements and stuff. So it just seems a bit of a scattergun approach that I think a lot of clubs are still suffering from now, to be honest.
Yeah, there was also something you mentioned there in terms of the kind of period that it was. And if you think about it, you know, Liverpool nearly won the league, didn't they? 13-14 on the Rodgers. There was this anticipation that they could hopefully push on and challenge again the year after, which was the campaign before Firmino signed, wasn't it? And if I remember correctly, that year it was a 6th place finish. I am getting these years right, aren't I? 6th place finish.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Some decent cup. I think there was 2 semi-finals, but on the whole, it was a bit of a disappointment. You know, crashed out of the Champions League pretty tamely. And I do think there was a lot of pressure on Rodgers to try and maybe change the direction again from the 13-14 kind of squad, because you know he'd lost like the likes of Suarez, didn't he? And he knew Gerrard was on his way, and maybe he just wanted to recruit with that in mind. But then equally, the club were thinking, well, you know, what players could potentially work well under a new regime, because you know some people thought Rodgers might have lost his job at the end of that season because of how it panned out, and maybe it was Firmino was a kind of a play that could fit both sides, I guess.
Yeah, it was a difficult period. That I think we lost the last game of the season 6-1 to Stoke. I think.
Yeah.
Steven Gerrard's last game, I'm pretty sure as well. Really, really bad. I think it would have been easy to just. Well, it wouldn't have been easy actually, because the season before Rodgers had took us as close as we'd been to a Premier League title. Next year he's getting beat 6-1 by Stoke. But if we'd have got rid of him at that point, you know, Klopp wasn't available. So I think we kept him in charge. Obviously, when Klopp became available and kind of made it known through the press he was interested, we were very quick to move Rodgers out the picture. So maybe Firmino was signed with a view to the new identity that Liverpool were trying to establish. Because I think right now he epitomises what Klopp's about. But certainly back then, it's hard to have much faith in Liverpool's recruitment because it was very. I think one word we use quite often is aligned. I think this was the opposite. This was just, as I said, scattergun really. But I think the next one we got in, Sadio Mane, I do think we got him in largely because of what we needed to surround Firmino with. Obviously, Klopp started to integrate Firmino as his number 9 in his first few weeks in charge. But the problem with anybody who's got a bit of a clue about tactics will look at Firmino and know that, like, if he's your centre forward, if he's your striker, he's going to be leading your line. You need speed and goals from elsewhere, really. And I think Sadio Mane was identified as that. Obviously coming from Southampton, kind of a Klopp, Dortmund type signing. I think they got Marco Reus from a smaller German club. Can't remember who they got him from. Can you?
No, that's the stuff, man.
And they got obviously Lewandowski from a Polish team. Aubameyang from someone in the French league. Like bottom half of the French league, Rennes or Lille or something like that. But I think Mane was very much a Klopp signing in more ways than one, and very much a signing that kind of, acted as a bit of a symbol for Liverpool's new dawn sort of thing.
Yeah, it was actually interesting. I noticed Klopp said at the time that he'd been a long-time admirer of Mane for a while, and he said he really liked him. I think it was at the Olympics when he would have been 20, and he'd been tracking him ever since. And he actually was quoted as saying, ever since I've come to the club, I've been talking about Sadio Mane. Obviously, Liverpool bought him at 24, and you just wonder if maybe Klopp was waiting to settle into an environment and also maybe just let the player develop. I imagine Mane at 20, he would have been pretty raw to what he is now. Kind of the way we speak about Ismail Sarr, although he's blew up over the last couple of months. But there's the reason why so many people were drawing comparisons 6 or 8 months ago is because there is some there, and I imagine Klopp kind of seen Mane in the same way. A really talented player, could see what he's about to become, but maybe just needs to develop a little bit more. But when it actually comes to signing from Southampton, it's easy to see the appeal, isn't it? Really, you've already touched on the Firmino point. I think that's important because he did need to start building players around him. But he was powerful, fast, dangerous. He fitted the profile. He had his output, didn't he? 13 goals, 7 assists. Underlying numbers backed it up as well. Backed those figures up. He just, I can't remember thinking it was that perfect when the deal actually got made. I could see the appeal, but I wasn't blown away. I just thought he looked a good player. But now looking back, and maybe it is a little bit of hindsight because we've seen how good he's become. But he just seems absolutely perfect for Klopp and this Liverpool side. Like, you can see why he made that move.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there. But I think with the brain, well, I was going to say with the brains we've got now, but with kind of like the perspective we've got now, if Liverpool were to make that signing now, buying a Mane from Southampton, would you interpret that differently? Because I am inclined to agree in terms of in 2016, I think it was, so 4 years ago. Obviously, I was less into football analytics at the time, all that sort of stuff. So I agree. I wasn't looking at it thinking, it makes absolute sense. I didn't really know as much about recruitment at the time. I just thought it'd be an okay signing. But I think if this was to happen now, I'd be a lot more excited about it.
100% agree, mate. As I said, I remember looking, thinking, okay, yeah, decent signing for Liverpool, but I would never be looking the way I am now, thinking, this is a perfect signing for them. You can see why they've done this. To me, and I feel really naive, but there's no point lying. looking back, I remember just thinking, oh, he looks like he's got a decent CV and he looks like he's doing fairly well. He's a decent age, scored a fair few and assisted in the Premier League. So they're obviously just here's the big club sweeping them up. But yeah, I totally agree with you. Now I'd be looking at that so much differently, and you'd almost, I don't know, you almost tilt your cap to the signing now when you look back on it, because it was a really good move, and the appeal is so easy to see looking back retrospectively, and it's no surprise really how good he's become.
Yeah, I think he will have shown up to Liverpool as, two-footed, a bit inconsistent at the time, but still, despite his inconsistency, very versatile across the attacking line. Scored 10 goals, I think, in his debut Premier League season. Then he scored 11 in the following season. That's decent for, Southampton, considering he's not a striker. He also registered 3 assists, and then the season later 6 assists. So he was kind of indicating a bit of, gradual improvement there, season by season. Obviously, lightning quick, very rarely injured, keeps himself in great shape. And in terms of the personality profile of him, which we probably don't talk about enough because we don't really, it's difficult to get the knowledge of that inside the club. But he comes across as incredibly humble and stuff like that, and the complete opposite of what you consider to be a celebrity sort of type. I think one interesting little note that a lot of Liverpool fans won't be aware of, the person who actually brought Sadio Mane to Europe. Any idea, Dave?
In terms of manager or in terms of who brought him to?
I don't think he was a manager at the time. He might have been a manager, but if not, he was kind of like a director of football sort
Go
for the
on.
club. Gerard Houllier.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah,
I
he
did
brought
not
him
know that.
to
No.
he brought him to Metz in France from
Was that through the academy? Was it the foot? Is it the footy? Yeah,
Generation Foot. Yeah, I think we mentioned that last week, didn't we? About
yeah,
the
we did. Yeah.
Generation Foot. That was in relation to Sarr, I think.
Mm.
But yeah, I think he was the man that brought him to Europe. He said the first time he seen him play was in London. I think you mentioned the Olympics there. It might have even been for the Olympics.
Yeah, 2012. So yeah, that marries up that, yeah. Because that's
Yeah,
that's where Klopp seemed to kind of really. I think he must have come on with Klopp's radar there, and he kind of tracked him ever since then.
yeah. He said he was quick, had international quality, good technique, could score goals, make goals. So yeah, I think it's interesting that bit of a long-held Liverpool connection there, considering who he used to be in charge of the club.
Mm.
But yeah, I think Mane just, as I said, if it was made now and we were covering the show on it, I think it'd be really encouraging. I think we'd be able to offer a lot of insight into why it's a sensible buy. His numbers, they weren't astronomical and they weren't like enough to maybe generate interest from European clubs. But in fact, I actually think Dortmund were aware of him. But inside the Premier League, obviously he was Premier League proven at the time. Needed to develop a little bit more. I think Liverpool signed him when he was only 24, I think.
Yeah.
And as I said, he was lightning quick, which is what Firmino wanted. So in terms of having Firmino, who's slow and doesn't score goals, paired with Mane, who's fast and does score goals, you're kind of masking the weaknesses of both players and highlighting the strengths. So it just made a lot of sense, really.
Just one thing I want to add that I'd forgot completely until I was having a look at his numbers earlier. He was pretty much exclusively playing on the right for Southampton that in his final season. And it seems bizarre now to think that he's Liverpool's go-to left player. I know he's so versatile, and all the front three are. But I just think that's really interesting that he, obviously he's adjusted to playing on the left with such kind of efficiency regularly.
Yeah, I mean, when he first came to Liverpool, he was deployed on the left as well because we still had Coutinho.
Yeah,
Coutinho can't play on the left. Can't play on the right, sorry.
yeah,
So Mane was kind of like a right winger, really. Coutinho was kind of like an inside forward hybrid midfielder type thing on the left, who just kind of bossed Liverpool's attack, really. Everything kind of went through him. but Mane was the crucial injection of speed that we just really lacked. We became such a slow team. Our fastest player was a left back, and he was the only player who was fast whatsoever. Like there was no one really who could compare to him. You know, I think Joe Gomez was in there, and probably Liverpool's two quickest players at the time were defenders. And then not long later, we signed Mo Salah. At the time, again, I thought it was a good buy, but didn't appreciate just how good he was. And still to this day, I can't really believe that Liverpool were the only club in the queue for him at the time, considering his profile and what he was offering.
Just on that, Josh, before we go into the numbers, do you think, because when you look at them now, they were good, weren't they? You know, he scored a high amount of goals in Serie A, overperforming his XG, but enough that kind of made you think he was more of a elite finisher rather than getting fortunate, shall we say? You know, already starting to see a really high output in terms of like shots and things. Not to the level we see at Liverpool now, but certainly noticeable. And I just wonder, do you think the reason there wasn't that interest is because he went to, well, basically because he and I'll sorry for those who are listening, but he failed at Chelsea. Do you think that's it? And he just thought he can't do it at a really big club in England?
Yeah, there's loads of, I think, traditional perceptions that Liverpool in the past few years have completely put in the bin and just kind of proved that they're nonsense, really. And I think when we get further into this and start addressing the likes of Robertson and players like that, I think it's going to be, there's quite a clear theme that Liverpool follow when it comes to this sort of stuff. But when I think Liverpool have since said, Ian Graham, I think, has since said it, the director of research at Liverpool, he said Salah didn't fail at Chelsea, he failed to get on the pitch. And there's a massive difference between the two of those things. I think maybe he left England with a negative perception, but any smart club, which Liverpool have become, that tracked what he did in Italy. You know, he was posting all kinds of ridiculous numbers. And, you know, with that, I'll move on to this. So I'll put this together. Hopefully you can see that.
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah. So that right is goals plus assists minus penalties per 90 in the year before Liverpool bought Salah. Europe's top 5 leagues, minimum 1,000 minutes played. It's quite a bit to digest. But as you can see, they're kind of the top performers in 2016, really. As you can see, there's a few familiar names at the top there. You've got Kylian Mbappe, Luis Suarez, and that was Kylian Mbappe at Monaco. Luis Suarez, Lionel Messi, Dries Mertens under Maurizio Sarri at the time. Obviously, a little bit of a red flag there that you've got Morata there, which Chelsea obviously kind of fell for, paying 70 million for him. But just down here, one of the few on the list who isn't actually a striker, Mohamed Salah at Roma. Obviously posting good numbers in comparison to those around him, the elite players around him, it's worth noting. I'll also say as well that Edin Dzeko, who also played for Roma, had an absolutely ridiculous season. I think he scored 29 goals in Serie A or something like that. It was a mental season. So I think although Salah was really strong in the season according to his numbers, he was actually Roma's, you know, the second man at Roma, really playing second fiddle to Dzeko. But yeah, I just thought that was interesting to put together, Dave. Just 2016 numbers. Usually, the further back you go, the worse the numbers are. But these are, you know, goals and assist numbers. So, you know, there's nothing really too elaborate there. It's not XG or anything like that. This is just standard goals and assist numbers. But as you can see, you got Salah there in amongst the top 20 in Europe's top 5 leagues. That is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean that's literally it. You know, the numbers were there. You know, 2.5 shots per 90. for a non-elite side, I think is really impressive. For, as you said, not a striker. That was kind of his time in Serie A, that 2.5. And
It's worth saying as well that when you say he wasn't a striker, at Roma as well, he wasn't even really an inside forward. He was kind of like a winger, really. I mean, I think they played 4-2-3-1 at the time, and obviously you've got Dzeko up front, who's a bit of a traditional 9, as opposed to a Firmino type, who's going to let other players get the goals. So I think Salah was playing in the system there at the age of, I think it was 24, in a defensive league, in a role that wasn't really ideally suited to him scoring goals. Yet he was, despite that, he was obviously right up there with the best.
yeah, exactly. Which it does just make me think that it lingered this sense that he perhaps found his level, or he couldn't really cut at an elite club, and the next kind of tier down is probably where he's meant to be. But I think you've then got to congratulate Liverpool for having a little bit more, I guess, confidence in the decision making to make a move. And how much was he about 30 million, Salah?
Yeah, I think he was pretty much exactly the same as Mane, or just maybe about 1 million more. I think we ended up paying about 36, 37, something like that.
So obviously it's a fairly substantial fee, though it looks dwarf now if you think about what you probably get if you sold them. But it just shows having the kind of confidence in your own beliefs on a player to actually make the move, and obviously it's paid dividends for them. Just a slightly separate point on Salah. I wouldn't mind getting your opinion on it, or just have the conversation on the podcast. Obviously, you've then with Salah in the side, you've got a really good front four, haven't you? Of Salah, Firmino, Mane, Coutinho. But do you think Liverpool could maybe sense that Coutinho was going to be sold within the next maybe 12 months, and knew that they could probably make a lot of money on him without actually missing him with these 3 players in a 4-3-3? And do you think they kind of had a contingency for that by bringing Salah in?
Well, I've always said that I think Coutinho was a bit of an odd tactical fit. I think if you're creating a foolproof system, he's not the type really that you want in there. Almost, he's a bit of a, you have to make accommodations for him. There's a few players out there like that. I think Messi's a bit like that. I think obviously your man Gylfi Sigurdsson's a bit like that. Players that are just a bit unconventional and don't really fit a specific role. I think Coutinho was a bit of a problem for Liverpool in that regard. And although Liverpool expressed their interest in keeping him, I do think that those at the club who really know what they're talking about in terms of squad building and tactics and that won't have been that gutted to lose him. I think it would have been bigger if we lost Firmino, for example, even though he wasn't as much of a star at the time. But yeah, I've said before in the past as well, I think this signature was massive for Liverpool in terms of moving towards 4-3-3 as a permanent fixture, as opposed to the 4-2-3-1 that it felt like Klopp was edging towards for quite a while, to be honest. We've talked about this before. We were linked with Mario Götze, Julian Brandt, Alex Teixeira, all players who were number 10 types. I think to have Salah and Mane, it was very much like we've got 2 out and out wide forwards there. It's going to be okay. We've got a number 10 in Firmino, but then we've got no 9. So I think it was a permanent switch after we moved Salah. I think Salah was a big signing for the future of Liverpool after that in terms of the tactical makeup of the team and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I agree with all that.
Obviously, that moved Mane as well from the right to the left.
Yeah, because and just another thing as well, he's proved to be pretty versatile himself, hasn't he? Obviously we saw about him being a kind of more traditional wide man, with in Serie A, and then he's then kind of become like the wide attacker at Liverpool, the wide forward. But we've seen him playing as a centre forward as well, haven't we? When Liverpool have adjusted things, and obviously we know sometimes in transitions, him and Mane will swap wings with complete comfort. All just little minor details that are quite relevant, really, when you think of this Liverpool side.
Yeah. If you just look at Salah, it was just such a sensible, obvious buy. Considering that, as I said, he was 24 at the time. He posted those numbers that we've just shown. Also left-footed. Also offered the pace and the goals that we said earlier Firmino needed around him to thrive. So it was just a really, really obvious buy that just made so much sense at the time. Completed Liverpool's attacking trio, regardless or not of whether Coutinho was going to stay or leave. Yeah, really important purchase, and I'd love Liverpool to buy someone like that now, so that we could do a full episode on it. I think we did quite a bit on Werner. I think Werner's in the same bracket roughly, but Salah was a signing in particular. I think Werner was more like, people knew he was good. With Salah, it felt like a weird narrative had developed, and a weird perception amongst the fan base that, what if this doesn't work? Well, I'm not sure about Salah. And I think on this podcast we would have been able to be like, listen, this is a great buy.
It would have really been nice to produce a "I told you so" over a play, wouldn't it? Be able to say, listen, I actually think these are going to be quite good, and then they turn out to be really good. I think we haven't been given enough opportunities to do them, really. Those little ego boosters.
Yeah, we've had the odd little match where we've called it right. Like, I think the Leicester one was good, wasn't it? Like when we beat Leicester away from home 4-0 or something. I think before that episode we painted as kind of like a Liverpool or Leicester's worst opponent sort of thing, and I think we've had a few of them. Like, but in terms of players, Liverpool have done enough business, really, have they, for us to get on the money with them.
You've just made me think there, actually, Josh. It'd be interesting to follow up on our data, scout and potential transfer players, because we did that back in January, didn't we? On players that you could potentially sign purely on numbers. I think it's relevant now when we're talking about the likes of Salah. And off the top of my head, I know. I mean, there was a guy I can't remember his name, who was just a centre back from absolutely nowhere. I'll be keen to see what happened with him. But I know Almo went to Leipzig, and Jonathan David's just gone to Lille. I can't remember what yours were, but it'll be interesting just to see if any others have had little moves or they've got some lined up.
Yeah, I can't remember what mine were, but I know one was Martin Odegaard, and I think he's since been recalled to Real Madrid. I think he's going to play in the first team next year.
His stock's massive now.
Yeah, he's not getting sent out on loan anymore, but I can't remember who else mentioned, to be honest.
We'll look at it between us, and if it's worth revisiting, we will. But yeah, I thought it was a good little concept, and the only reason I'm flagging is because obviously, these kind of Liverpool. I mean, they would have looked at so much more than just numbers, of course. Any side does, but more so Liverpool. But I think it would have been it's just interesting, because when you think of what's Salah's output at the time, and obviously he's gone on to be a phenomenal forward in the Premier League, it's just interesting.
Yeah, so not long after Salah signed, in fact, it might have been even the other way around, but we got Robertson in, Andy Robertson. Obviously, initially didn't really make that much of an impact, barely played up until Christmas. But I think the general idea behind the signing, I think we'd kind of identified that Moreno was a little bit, although he's got the attacking side to his game, and Klopp wanted to clearly work with him because he had the attacking traits and stuff like that. I do think he just showed up really as not aggressive enough, not enough of a grafter, not much of an intimidating opponent sort of stuff on the defensive side in particular. So I think we got Robertson as competition there, only 8 million from, crucially, a relegated team. And I think this is one of the things that, I sent a newsletter out, the Analysing Anfield newsletter, a few weeks ago when we were linked with Lewis. And I just kind of summed up the basic criteria for Liverpool signing. It's just, ticking these boxes. So it's just basically young, as in, under 25, usually. Full of potential, athletic, undervalued, available, and attack-minded. They're basically the key pillars of Liverpool's recruitment. And I think a lot of these players that we're mentioning here, the available aspect is one that we don't often consider that much. Obviously, Robertson was clearly available. He'd just been relegated. Salah at Roma, Mane only Southampton, Firmino at Hoffenheim. So yeah, we don't usually try and get players out of clubs when the club wants to keep the player, because usually you end up paying a bit of a premium. But yeah, Robertson for about the same price that we sold Kevin Stewart for, I think, to Hull. And I just think he showed up similar to Tsimikas has, in terms of a player at a different club whose ability will translate at Anfield.
Yeah, I must say, I found the Robertson one really interesting when we've looked back this morning before the show, because obviously the others you could see you could mostly see the impressive kind of output, but we know with players who've potential, especially a defender of sorts anyway, at relegated sides, it's difficult, isn't it, really, to see the quantifiable stuff, the numbers. And I'll be honest, I don't know if you've had the time to have a look, I didn't think his underlying numbers looked anything special at all in that season. As I said, the caveat is it's really hard to, have impressive numbers playing for a side who eventually get relegated. He didn't look that great in the air. Defensive duel numbers weren't that great. I think he got 1 assist, and I had expected assist number of like 1.1 or something. So nothing remarkable, but I'm glad that you kind of started the segment talking about those other kind of tangibles. About the kind of aggressiveness, psychology of the player, maybe work ethic, stamina. These things that is really hard to quantify in numbers. But I feel like there are examples of Liverpool really valuing these. And I think the Robertson one is huge. I think I feel like they would have recruited him more on what they've watched, video and kind of what they've seen in matches, than necessarily a player who's been flagged as in the data as someone who's a bit of an outlier who'd probably be worth pursuing further. It feels like they've watched them and they've saw a lot of things that they really like about him on the pitch, and that's maybe led to the signing. Added with the fact, obviously, as you mentioned, availability and really cheap price, it was a low risk move.
Yeah, this is probably a really good point, because we talk a lot about numbers on this show, a lot about statistics and stuff like that. But when it comes to recruitment, especially Liverpool's recruitment, good recruitment that very rarely sees mistakes happen, there's a lot more that goes into it than just numbers. And I think in the case of certain players, you won't be like Liverpool. I doubt will have signed Van Dijk because of his numbers. Maybe his aerial success and stuff like that, but so much more goes into it. The tactical side, the culture side, what a player's like as a person, the stamina side. And it wouldn't surprise me if, when Klopp did come in, he sat down with his team of just experts and just kind of expressed his brand of football and what a player needs to execute that brand of football, even on the fitness side. Like, say, for example, Liverpool's head of fitness and conditioning, Anders Kornmeyer, who we got from Bayern Munich. It wouldn't be surprised if he's played some part in Liverpool's recruitment over the years, simply as from the perspective of maybe Michael Edwards, who's kind of identified Klopp's brand of football and had to identify what a player needs to execute that brand of football. And obviously on the physical side, you need a lot of stamina, high intensity sprints and all stuff like that. And a lot of players might not be as capable of doing that. I think Liverpool just consider absolutely everything with those obvious key principles ticked. And if a player applies, and in this case only costs 8 million, then it's worth taking a chance. I think Robertson's background in Scottish football and what he's like as a person, for me, already suggests he's going to be a bit more of an intense character than Moreno was. while also being just as adventurous on the attacking side. Like one thing I hate, right? One thing that does me head in is coming across a little bit scouse there, and one thing that does my it's when people interpret an attacking fullback. People interpret an attacking fullback as like, positionally bad. He's always out of position. Or it's a really easy thing to say about a fullback who's adventurous and attacking. Always caught out of position a lot. But it's not always the case. There's more to it. And when it comes to playing for Liverpool, you know, being caught out of position a lot, that can be easily trained and stuff like that.
I also think, and this is really important for people who want, who like to do a little bit of analysis, even if it's only on a fan level. I think some people can be guilty sometimes of analysing players like they're analysing a tennis player. And what I mean by that is analysing players as individuals. But you've got to remember that they're all playing as part of a wider game, as part of a wider aim, team tactics. So take that point that you just made, for example. He's always getting caught out of position, but is he always getting caught out of position, or is he instructed to assist with the attacks? He's bombing forward, the ball gets lost in the middle of the park, and suddenly he's caught high up the pitch as a mistake of someone else, and now it looks as if he's out of position, when in reality, you're in the transition and you're attacking, and a teammate's lost the ball, and now you're having to work back. But for me, that doesn't mean that he's always in the wrong position or he's making errors. It's that's part and parcel of the game, and that's kind of what you have to accept if you instruct your wing backs to play that role. I don't know if we've gone down a rabbit hole a little bit here, but I think those points are important to make.
Yeah, I just think a lot of attacking fullbacks, they will look terrible on the defensive side of a relegated team. If you was like at the time Trent was coming through, if you was to put Trent as Hull's right back in that season, he's probably gonna look awful, but that doesn't mean he is. His ability can translate into a higher quality team when he's surrounded by better individuals. He's seeing more of the ball and all that sort of stuff. And I think we better move on to the arguably the main man, Virgil van Dijk. This was a saga dragged on for months and months. Liverpool opted against seeking another alternative when we had to wait 6 months before signing him, which suggested that Liverpool had one man in mind. That was Van Dijk. According to the numbers, at least, I think it's quite clear that one of his biggest perks is the aerial dominance. I think he finished inside the top 5 for aerial success consistently in Europe, in the Premier League and all that sort of stuff. 6'4", fast. And again, it's that ability to translate from Southampton to a dominant attacking team. Does he have the perks, the qualities, the skill set to start defending on the halfway line for Liverpool and thriving? And clearly he does.
Yeah, he was Liverpool just needed a quality centre back. If you think about rivals at the time, off the top of my head, City, you think Company, he was still there. He was integral to their defence. It felt to me like Liverpool didn't really have that leader in the defence, and haven't had it for years. So from that point of view, he was massive. If we're going to focus on numbers, I mean, I had a quick look in that. I had a look at his final full season at Southampton, because obviously that's when Liverpool made the move at the conclusion of that season. And defensive duels won just under 73%. Aerial duels won just under 73%. I mean, those numbers just alone, and there's so much more to defending, obviously, but just 2 basic metrics there. Those success rates alone would just make you sit up. And then when you throw in everything else, as you said, his height, he's really strong, he's quick, he reads the game fantastic. His decision making is brilliant as well. You're very lit. I was writing a piece yesterday or the day before. I just come across the fact that I'm pretty sure he's made this season something like 3 slide tackles all season. And that just kind of captures how composed he is. He very rarely has to lunge in. he's just kind of he's almost
He's
made.
always in control, isn't he?
Yeah, he's made in a laboratory, isn't he? Really, he's a kind of one of the kind. We sometimes try and talk about him and compare him to other central defenders, but it's just really hard to find a player like him out there. He's just that good.
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned earlier about the criteria, and I mentioned the final tick box would be attack-minded. I think although Van Dijk's a centre-back, his long passes in particular, and what he offers on the set pieces, I've offered quite a bit to Liverpool's attacking game, despite him being a centre-back. He's also obviously very cool-headed. He was captain at Southampton at the time, which again captures his personality and all that sort of stuff. Age 26 when we bought him, peak years. And probably Liverpool's biggest weakness at that time was getting bullied in the air by the likes of Burnley in particular. When you pressed him high, he just hit long and he scored some set pieces and stuff like that. And we went and signed Van Dijk, who seemed to just the few weaknesses that Liverpool had left, that Klopp had just gradually worked on. The few that we had left, Van Dijk just seemed to completely eradicate those final few weaknesses to the point where now Liverpool are just flawless, really. I mean, not a lot that you can get at against Liverpool. And I think the next player, Fabinho, very, very similar again. Very few people seem to focus on the fact that Fabinho's 6'2", and similar to Van Dijk, another aerially dominant player who's going to be sitting deep. I actually looked for. I'll be saying this season or last season. How are we viewing 2019-20?
Let's go with last season is 1920, and the new season could be this season.
Okay, so last season,
that switch.
last season, Europe's top 5 leagues. I think it was 1,500 minutes played, and I looked at sitting midfielders. So midfielders either playing as the deeper man in the midfield three or as part of a two. And Fabinho ranked third in Europe for aerial success. Can't remember the percentage, but it's just another, reinforcing that kind of eradication of being vulnerable in the air, which you just can't be in England. And I think he also introduced the control and the coolness that Liverpool quite clearly identified they needed. After the 4-3 against City, where it nearly went to the wire, and we conceded 3 late against Sevilla after being 3-0 up, we introduced Van Dijk, we introduced Fabinho, just dominant figures who are just really cool no matter what. And I think Fabinho's signatures made a real difference to our Liverpool play, particularly how they managed gaining the lead and getting results.
Yeah, I agree. I think Fabinho's been a fantastic signing. I think he was managed really well when he come in. There wasn't an over reliance on them. There was almost like this bedding in period. Defensive numbers were really good. I wanted to see if what formation Monaco were playing that year. I was curious to see whether it was like a 4-3-3, and that's why he was highlighted as one of the candidates. And it looked like he was often in a 2, but it was with João Moutinho a fair bit. He was obviously not really a defensive style player. So although in a 2, the chances are he was doing the defensive work of 2 players, despite playing in a double pivot. I also thought it was quite interesting that his passing numbers in that final season with them were virtually similar to how many passes he sees now for Liverpool. And I do think that's a point worth highlighting when it comes to recruitment in terms of, things like passing. If it's, and I suppose you alluded to a little bit with Van Dijk about the changes, how Southampton played to Liverpool. But, if you're a midfielder who sees, 35 passes per 90, but then you're going to be coming to Liverpool and seeing arguably double that. There's question marks whether you can then size up your things like your accuracy in those passes and whether you can do it successfully. And I think that's something probably Liverpool consider. And obviously it's worked. They know that he can see that level of passes per 90 and keep up the same kind of accuracy levels.
Yeah, just share the little screen there. So those who are listening on the podcast, if you want to see the visualizations we're using, go to the YouTube channel. But that's Monaco's most used system in League One in the year before we signed Fabinho. As you can see, David, as rightly paired with Jamusinho, but a little bit more of the defensive partner, a little bit deeper, with the attacking quartet basically doing what they want. I actually thought it was a 4-4-2 that kind of transformed into a 4-2-2-2. But according to this tool that we're using here, it's saying 4-2-3-1. But yeah, I think Fabinho really important signing. Obviously, you also couple in the fact that he's never injured, and the fact that we bought him age 24. Again, another player that we've bought just as he's entered in his peak. It's just they're all just every one of them's just a sensible buy. It's quite clear if you look at all the perks they offer and the negatives they don't really offer. And the risk attached to them and stuff like that, how they make sense in terms of the squad and the teammates, addressing weaknesses, making the team stronger. They all just make so much sense. And with not long remaining of the podcast, we'll finally move on to Alisson, who kind of is the cherry on the cake, really, isn't he?
Yeah, another really good buy. They've all, virtually everyone we've talked about here has been huge purchases at important times for Liverpool, but there's just something about the Van Dijk and Alisson one for me that felt like it just took Liverpool to that next level. Because the attack felt really good anyway, but just those two purchases, it felt like Liverpool went from being a top four side to legitimate, title challengers, and I mean it proved to be that because they've gone on to finish second and then won it this year, and it does feel like they were the real kind of marquee buys for me.
Yeah, I think it moves you, doesn't it, from a good team to a great team. That's the step you're making, really. Even the way they both signed, both turning up to the medicals in all black suits. It was just business. It was just the business end of like, this is when we start challenging as an elite team. I do think, I must say, I do think that the general importance and contribution of a goalkeeper, I think, is generally quite underestimated. I think if you can have a top quality keeper between your sticks, it is honestly the difference between about 15 points at certain times, especially if, like, say, for example, Alisson and Kepa. Alisson and Kepa were both signed in the same summer for about the same fee. Since, how much more points has Alisson been worth to Liverpool than Kepa has for Chelsea? I'd actually say Kepa has had a minus influence on Chelsea. And I think on Liverpool's side, Alisson's probably had a plus. I'd say plus at least 10 points. So, the difference is massive.
Yeah, I don't. I'm sure I've said it on this show before, but there's a general agreement amongst like the within the football statistician community that a goal over the course of a season will probably average out to a value of a point. So I always say, if you're conceding 10 more goals as a result of a poor goalkeeper, it's probably going to cost you 10 points. I just really quickly, I do have some of the numbers for his last season, and Alisson, post shot XG against was
Is this
37. What
at Roma?
At Roma, yeah. So this is just
Okay.
before Liverpool signed him. Post shot XG against 37.08, and he conceded just 28 goals. So that's nearly 10 goals there, and 18 clean sheets as well that season. And
Yeah.
we say you don't just judge a goalkeeper on clean sheets, which is true, but you do probably judge, in some ways at least, a keeper and his defence on clean sheets. And something that's really, I think, important with Alisson is how the composure and the influence he has on the players around him, the defenders in front of him. And I think that's really important. We've seen it at Liverpool now. I think he's not just a good goalkeeper, but you just feel so much safer when he's on the pitch, don't you? From a Liverpool perspective, you feel so much more assured. And I think the defenders do as well.
Yeah, according to save percentage as well, he placed Europe's top 5 leagues. He placed second behind only Jan Oblak in his final year at Roma, saving 81.5 of the shots that he faced. So, and again signed aged 24, right before his peak again. It's something that bit of a recurring theme throughout. I'll go back to that criteria. So young, full of potential, athletic, undervalued, available, and attack minded. Alisson ticks the young, full of potential, attack minded, probably not undervalued. I think it was probably fair. Available, yes. Athletic, well, I mean he's a goalkeeper, isn't he? So doesn't really apply to that one, but it's just it just makes sense. Just persistently, year on year, Liverpool have just addressed weakness after weakness with every signing, making the team that bit more complete with every sign fitting the theme of what it means to be a Liverpool player, ticking on the boxes and all that sort of stuff. Hence why there hasn't really been any mistakes at all. So it'll be interesting to see whether in the coming weeks Liverpool stick with that theme, because I'm just thinking now, obviously the links with Thiago remain, but I think Thiago would be possibly the first player that Liverpool have bought, with the exception of a short-term fix in Ragnar Klavan. Thiago would be the only player that Liverpool have bought who you could argue has actually passed his peak. Obviously 29, so that would be an interesting, adjustment of the theme that we've seen for 5 years now or so. But yeah, maybe if something further develops on that front, we'll address it with a full episode or so. But yeah, and you want to add on that, Dave? Or?
No, the only thing I've just realised is we've run out of time, but we didn't touch on Oxlade-Chamberlain, which I thought might have been an interesting one.
Yeah, well, I also want to skip Wijnaldum, so
Yeah,
maybe we can, if it's equally as dry next week in terms of the news front, the Liverpool front, maybe we can address further squad members. So yeah,
just,
first episode.
sorry, I was going to say just on Wijnaldum. I had someone DMing me, and I think he tagged us in tweet as well. Bowler. I think it's Odegaard, but I might have that wrong. Sorry, Bowler. But he's been talking about Wijnaldum because and I mean, I won't ruin it now. Maybe we should talk about it, but he just pointed out that statistically he doesn't really look that great in attack or defence. And I've mentioned before, well, I mentioned it to him and we've spoke about it, that he kind of plays within himself, but maybe that's something we can look at as well next week if we have time. Just I'll look at what he brings, because you imagine if Thiago does come in, that he could be the player that maybe misses out.
Yeah, no, that's a common thing with Wijnaldum. I think he's generally, in terms of his numbers, he's quite misunderstood. But yeah, this was the first. I think it was the first fan suggested full episode that we've done. Obviously, we'll take that suggestion that you just mentioned on board ahead of next week. But if anyone does have any ideas, especially if there's no news coming to us from the footballing world, then give us a shout and we'll maybe do another episode like this. So yeah, hopefully you've learned a little bit there, and maybe there's a few more players next week. But thanks for joining us anyway, Dave.
Yeah, cheers, mate. Cheers, everyone.
And we will be back next week. See you later.